There is one complaint about the French defense that every single player has, and the Caro-Kann fixes it in one move. Same solid structure, same pawn on d5, except this time your bishop is not trapped behind it for 40 moves. White plays pawn to e4. In part 1 we hit back with the Sicilian. This time we are going to do something much calmer, and much harder to beat. Pawn to c6. That is it. That is the whole opening. It looks like nothing, and what it actually does is prepare pawn to d5 with a pawn behind it, so when you challenge the center you are challenging it with something you can afford to trade. And here is the difference from the French. In the French you play pawn to e6 first, and that bishop on c8 spends the game staring at its own pawn. In the Caro-Kann, c6 does the same job and the bishop still gets out. That is the entire pitch. Pawn to d4, the main move, 42%. He builds the big center. And pawn to d5, right on cue. Now that pawn is attacked, and it is defended twice. He has to make a decision, and there are only 4 things he can do. He can defend the pawn with knight to c3. He can push past with pawn to e5. He can trade with pawn takes d5. Or he can prop it up with pawn to f3. For systems, and that is genuinely all of them. We focus on knight to c3 first, because it is the main line and the one you will get the most. Knight to c3, defending the pawn one more time. So you just take. Pawn takes e4. He has a big center, you remove half of it. He recaptures with the knight. And here it is. Bishop to f5. This is the move the whole opening exists for. It is outside the pawn chain, it is hitting his knight, and it is the piece that would have been stuck at home in the French. The knight has to move, so it goes to g3 and kicks you. Bishop to g6. Still outside, still perfectly happy. Pawn to h4. He wants to chase the bishop all the way to h7 with pawn to h5. Pawn to h6. Stop it. Now h5 would just lose a pawn. Knight to f3, developing. And knight to d7. This is the classical Caro-Kann, and it is one of the most solid positions in all of chess. White is a touch better because he is white. You have no weaknesses, and every piece has a square. Back to the fork. Now we focus on pawn to e5, the advance, which is the one that scares people the most. Pawn to e5. He locks the center and grabs space, and if you have ever played the French you know this feeling. Except your bishop is not locked in. Bishop to f5, out of the chain, before you touch your e-pawn. This is the single most important move order in the entire Caro-Kann. Knight to f3. And now pawn to e6, because the bishop is already outside. Bishop to e2. And pawn to c5, hitting his center at the base. This is why the pawn went to c6 in the first place. It was always going to c5. White keeps a small pull here, half a pawn, and he has to actually prove it. Back again, and we focus on the trade, pawn takes d5. Pawn takes d5. And you take back with the c-pawn. Look at the board. Totally symmetrical pawns, no weaknesses anywhere, and the bishop on c8 is completely free. Bishop to d3. Knight to c6. Pawn to c3, propping up d4. Knight to f6 and you are done. This is the quietest line white has, it is about plus 0.3, and honestly if your opponent plays this he has already told you he does not want to fight. Last one from the fork. We focus on pawn to f3, which has the best name in chess, the fantasy variation. Pawn to f3. He is defending e4 with a pawn so he can keep the huge center. It is aggressive, and it does something he cannot take back. It weakens the squares around his own king. So do not panic and do not grab. Pawn to e6, solid as a rock, and now every time he opens the position that f3 pawn is a liability. Roughly plus 0.3, and it is far easier to play as black than it looks. Now, 2 more, because 42% means the majority of your games do not even start with pawn to d4. Knight to f3 is 30% all by itself, and it usually just transposes back. Pawn to d5 anyway. Same plan, always. Knight to c3. And bishop to g4, pinning the knight. Notice the theme. Every single line, that bishop gets out. That is the opening. And one you will meet constantly at club level. Bishop to c4, going for the quick kill on f7. It is called the Hillbilly attack, and I am not making that up. Pawn to d5. Immediately. You are hitting the pawn and the bishop with one move, and he has already lost the thread. He takes. And you take back, hitting the bishop again with tempo. Look at the eval bar, because this is the only line in the video where it is on your side. Black is already better, on move 3, against the guy who thought he was attacking you. So that is the Caro-Kann. One pawn move, for systems, and one idea holding all of it together. Get the bishop out before you block it in. It will not win you games in 20 moves, it will win them in 50, because you will still have a position while the other guy has run out of ideas. Like and subscribe, and tell me what you want for part 3.